Hey there everyone, it's Jaycee. Welcome back to another perfect pairing. I'm excited to share 2 ways I quickly added texture to watercolor. I used Altenew items you already own and love and supplemented them with accessible tools in your home but may not know how to bring them into your crafty space. Before I reveal what those are, let's talk about the Altenew products I used for these cards. First up is the Altenew 9x12" watercolor paper pad. It is the perfect paperweight for the techniques I'll show you today. To color this paper, I'll grab a few of the watercolor brush marker refills from the Winter Wonderland set. These are suspended and concentrated watercolor pigments in a dropper style bottle. To complete my pairing, I'll bring out the new Craft a Flower Lily die set and Virginia Rose 3D die set to compose my own layered flower bouquet. All of these materials are linked in the description box, and while you're down there, make sure you subscribe and like this video for more crafty tutorials. On my Altenew cutting mat, I've cut the 9x12 watercolor panel in half on the longest side and taped the paper to my mat using some really cheap washi tape. I'll bring in a cup of clean water and a large paddle type watercolor brush, as well as a spray bottle with water. Now with the Altenew watercolor brush marker refills in Lagoon, Emerald, and Mountain Mist, I'll create a quick base gradient from left to right on the watercolor paper. I'm doing this by spraying the paper liberally with water first, then dropping however many drops I feel like adding to the paper in one of 4 quadrants just so I have an even color spread. I'll do the same with Jet Black, Espresso, and Citrus Burst on the lower panel. I'm working fairly quickly, trying to keep the paper from drying completely. Now here's where I will add the texture to this watercolor gradient. I'll mist the top panel one more time with water, ensuring that the pigment hasn't fully settled into the paper. Then I'll grab salt, this is just a larger grain salt, and sprinkle it all over the paper. Learning from watching my own video, less salt is actually better for this technique as you'll get dramatic results when dry. The key is that the watercolor pigment has to be suspended to work. You can't moisten a dry panel and add salt to it. The same is true for the bottom panel. I'm slightly moistening the suspended pigment, and this time I'll liberally add rice to the entire panel. The rice and salt panels are going to do relatively the same thing, which is leave halos of darker and lighter pigment. There are many other additives you can use to add texture, however these are 2 that are easy to replicate at home, and these 2 kitchen items quickly give an abstract flower petal veining that is so striking and beautiful without a lot of coloring skill. I think this is a fun one to get the kids in on too. But anyway, this is important. You have to leave these panels to air dry. Using a heat tool is only going to get salt and rice everywhere and ruin the textured effect of these watercolor panels. So I'm just going to come back to my craft room in a few hours when the panels are fully dry. I think about 3 or 4 hours later, I'll remove the washi tape from the paper and clean off the surface of these watercolor panels. Do not reuse the salt or rice, just toss it please. I'll zoom in so you can see the neat texture you can achieve with rice and salt. So first up is the rice. I love the dramatic contrast of this one, and I think it'll be perfect for the leaves. And now the salt. This one is more fitting for petals as the transitions are softer, but I'll actually show you a more dramatic texture example with less salt later in this video, and it's all a matter of preference. So now let's break out the flower dies. Again, this is Virginia Rose 3D die set and the new Craft a Flower Lily. I'll also add the Seashore Gradient Cardstock pack as it coordinates with the liquid watercolor colors I used for the teal salt gradient. I also wanted to play around with a mix of solid and textured layers for a visually interesting flower. So I've got the watercolor panel around Mountain Mist, gradient cardstock in Volcano Lake, watercolor panel around Lagoon, gradient cardstock in Emerald, and finally a piece of black cardstock for the stamens. That's in order of the layers as well, following the layering guide found on the packaging of the Craft a Flower. I'll die cut all of these elements using my favorite mini blossom die cutting machine. I did have to use the metal shim that fits in the mini blossom for the watercolor paper and the finer die cut images. Now that I have all the pieces cut, I'll assemble them using liquid glue, again following the layering guide, starting from the base layer and working my way up. I think the variations in watercolor help transition the colored layers more smoothly, and the added texture is a bonus. Here's a more intense version to contrast the seashore gradient. This one I used less salt that was spread apart more on the paper. The effect is really psychedelic, especially with the jewel tones. I'll have a photo of this card towards the end of this video. Moving forward, I already die cut the layers of the Virginia Rose, again doing a mix of watercolor and gradient cardstocks. I'm not showing the entire process because your panels will look different than mine, so achieving light and dark layers is going to look different for your card, which is what I love about this textured watercolor panel technique. And there is no wrong way of adding these layers, the world is your oyster. Here is the layered Virginia Rose bud accompanied by the other two flowers. This is why I love these two flower die sets together, is because you get an odd number of flowers, which is visually satisfying, and they fit perfectly on a card front in a triangular arrangement. I cut the layering leaves and leaf clusters from the jet black and espresso gradient cardstock with the rice texture and drafted my arrangement using the alignment grid on my Altenew cutting mat. To make my sentiment, I'll use the Mega Brush Alpha alphabet stamp set from Altenew. I'll let you in on this quick tip too for using these irregular letters on mirror cardstock. First, I'll grab this scrap piece of paper. This is just typing paper. I'm going to spell the word best and draft it on this scrap paper. Once I'm happy with the spacing and the alignment of the letters, I'll trim off a margin of paper on the top right at a 90-degree angle. Basically, I want this to fit snug on the top right corner of my Misty. Using my template, I'll align every other letter, so in my case B and S, and pick up the stamps in the lid of my Misty. This is like how you look through your photopolymer stamps to check your alignment on Altenew's Build-A-Flower. I'll remove my template and treat my mirror cardstock with a generous amount of anti-static powder. Then I'll ink up the letter stamps with an embossing ink and stamp it on my cardstock. I'll apply Altenew Pure White embossing powder to the sticky ink and heat set it using a heat gun. This happens much faster than on regular cardstock, so just be sure to keep your heat tool moving. Now I'll put the cardstock and template back into the Misty, aligning the papers to the top right corner as before. I'll align the letters E and T to my template, pick up the letters with the lid of my Misty, remove the template, treat the mirror cardstock with anti-static powder, stamp the letters with embossing ink, and heat set the pure white embossing powder. The result is a perfectly aligned and spaced brush sentiment on mirror cardstock. I'll fussy cut out this word, leaving a substantial margin around the letters, and this finishes part of my sentiment. For the other half, I'll ink up and cut out this "You Are the Best" sentiment from the Best Sentiments mini stamp set from Altenew, leaving off the word best. And now I have a complete sentiment again. You are the best. I'll assemble this card on top of a bronze splatter background that coordinates with the bronze mirror cardstock. Here's my draft arrangement from earlier, leaving space for the best brush letter sentiment. I prefer liquid glue on all my paper piece to cards like this, so that's what I'm using to glue all of these elements down. I'll foam mount the Craft a Flower Lily flower, as well as the sentiments for more dimension on this card. After adding some subtle satin white sequins, that finishes this card using some quick watercolor texture techniques. Craft a Flower Lily and Virginia Rose 3D die are one of many floral die cut combinations you can use on your next pairing. The wonderful thing is Craft a Flower is a subscription service, so the fun continues every month and the possibilities keep growing. Here's the other card I made with a more intense color palette. I love the neon look of this arrangement. All of the Altenew materials I used in this video can be found in the description box below. While you're checking that out, make sure you like this video, share it with your Altenew friends, and subscribe for more card making how-to videos. Thank you so much for watching, please stay well, and I'll see you in the next one.